Hello guys, this is part 126 of ASP.NET video tutorial. In this video, we will discuss about caching application data in ASP.NET. In part 119 to 125 of the ASP.NET video tutorial, we discussed about caching web form, caching multiple responses. Let me show you the third presentation slide. Caching multiple responses of web form, fragment caching, using user controls, caching multiple versions of user controls. If you have not watched these videos, I would strongly encourage you to do so before continuing with this session. It is possible to store application data in the web server memory using the cache object so that the data can be retrieved faster. For example, let's say we have a stored procedure that takes 5 seconds to execute and return data. We can cache the data returned by this stored procedure within an ASP.NET web application using the cache object so that next time when we try to access the data, we can get it from the cache rather than reprocessing the stored procedure again. Let's see that in actions. Before that, I show you the complete. This is the third presentation slide. Let's see that in action. Let's flip to SQL Server Management. Let me show you. I have made a mistake here. Yeah. Where is the third presentation slide? This is the caching multiple version of user control. Here I mistakenly typed 122. It should be 119 to 125. So let me first correct it. 119 to 95. Okay. So let's flip to Visual Studio. Where is the Visual Studio? Here it is. Where is the Visual Studio? Yeah, here it is. Let's flip to SQL Server Management Studio. I have table products. I have table TBL table product table here, and I have a stored procedure here, SP get products. Here is the SP get products, and if you look at this stored procedure, it is pretty simple. Let me first, if you If you look at this stored procedure, it is pretty simple. All it does is let star from TBL products, select star. I have run this select star from TBL products, and but before that we have this wait for delay. But before that we have this wait for delay. Now since this is a very small table, and has got only 4 rows, as you can see here, only 4 rows. If I execute this select star from TBL products, it is going to execute in less than a second. Means if I again execute it, so it is going to execute in less than a second just to introduce some artificial query processing time. I am using this wait for delay. Wait for delay. Just to introduce some artificial query processing time, I am using this wait for delay here. So wait for delay, the first two zero, the first 20 are the hours, the next 20 are minutes, and the last 20 are second. So I am blocking the execution of this stored procedure by 5 seconds. So I am blocking the execution of this stored procedure by 5 seconds using this wait for delay. To introduce some artificial query processing time. So now if I execute this stored procedure, so now if I execute this stored procedure, it is going to take at least 5 seconds because we are blocking the execution for 5 seconds using this wait for delay here. Okay. So let me execute it and you will see here it is, the time is running 1 second, 2 second, 3 second, 4 second, 5 second. Look at that. Here is the timing. As you can see, 5 second. Within 5 seconds, the data gets displayed. Okay. Now let's see how to execute this stored procedure from within an ASP.NET web application. And then we will try and cache the data that is returned by this stored procedure. So let's flip to Visual Studio. So here I have an ASP.NET web application. So go to the Visual Studio. So here I have an ASP.NET web application project where we have this webform1.axpx, and at the moment the design is pretty simple. I have a button control, I have a grid view, as you can see here, grid view control, and the label control, okay. So if you look at the HTML, that is what you see here. If you see the HTML, that is what you see here, a button control. Where is the button control? There it is. Here is the button control, grid view control, and label control. Okay. In the code behind file, go to code behind file. In the code behind file, I have already written the edu.NET code I have already written the edu.net code. Here you can see this. I have already written edu.net code. Edu.net code to retrieve, basically execute this stored procedure, basically execute this stored procedure sp get products, and return the data, and if you look at it, we have to look here, and if you look at it, look at that, if you look at that, it is simple edu.net code. Okay, so if you are new edu.net code, I would strongly encourage you to watch the edu.net video tutorial where we discussed about connecting to the database and executing commands and stored procedures. So basically, if you look at here, we are using configuration manager. If you look at here, we are using configuration manager class to read web.config file, web.config connection string, to read web.config connection string. So in web.config file, so where is the web.config file? Here it is. So in web.config file, I have a connection string here. This is the connection string. I have this connection string. I have a connection string here, and the name of the connection string is db connection string, which is basically pointing to my SQL Server, local SQL Server database. This is the source desktop. Okay, let's change the connection string to that. Means I have copied this and paste it here. Though I have already pasted it here, so I don't need to do that again. So then after we have the connection string, we are creating the SQL connection object. We are creating the SQL connection object, creating a SQL data adapter, creating a SQL data adapter object, and we are specifying stored procedure, and we are specifying the stored procedure that we want to execute, in this case sp get products, and this stored procedure will execute using this connection, using this will be executed using this connection object, and we are specifying the command type, as stored procedure command type, and we are specifying the commands type as stored procedure, because this is a stored procedure that we are executing, creating a data set here, and then we are populating that data set, and we are populating that data set with the result that we get back after we have this stored procedure, executed, and look at this, the important thing to notice here is that the return type of this method, and look at this, the important thing to notice here is that the return type of this method is a data set. Return type is data set object, and look at this, finally we are returning the data set back. So pretty simple, straightforward edu.NET code. Now let's say, whatever data set that we get back by executing, by calling this method, we want to cache that data. So how do we do that? Caching data itself is pretty straightforward. All you need to do is use the cache object. All you need to do is use the cache object and then give it a key. So I can give any meaningful key. So here, as we are storing products data, I'm going to give it a key called products data, and then we can simply assign our data set. So we invoke this method. So we invoke this method. So we can simply assign our data set. So we invoke this method, and then whatever this method invoke this method, and then whatever this method is going to return, I'm going to store in the cache object. So whatever this method is going to return, I'm going to store in the cache object with this key. Okay. That's it. This is how we store basically the data in a cache. Now let's actually create a data set objects. Let's call it ds data set. Let's actually create a data set. Let's call it ds, and then let's assign whatever, and then let's assign whatever this method is returning to the data set, and then let's use the data set. So what we need to do here, so let's call it we have created a dataset object, call it ds, and then let's assign whatever the method is returning to that dataset. This is the method get products data, and then let's use this, and then let's use this dataset to be stored in the cache, and let's use this dataset to be stored in the cache. All right. Now let's assign this dataset to the grid view control. So we have a grid view control with ID, So we have a grid view control with ID. With ID GV products. So I'm going to assign that data set as the data source. Okay, so I am going to assign that data set as the data source for the grid view control. So GV products dot data source is equal to data set. So GV products dot data source is equal to data sets. And finally, let's go ahead and invoke the data bind method. Data bind method. Invoke the data bind method, and let's also say in the label I want to display the number of rows. In the label I want to display the number of rows that we have in this data set, So to retrieve the number of rows in a data set, in the data set I use data set dot, data set is nothing but a collection of tables. Data set is nothing but a collection of tables. And we know that this data set contains one table. So data set dot tables data set dot tables data set dot tables of 0 data tables data set of tables of 0, which returns the first table, and within that I want the number of rows, and within that I want the number of rows. And then I can use the count, I can use the count property. So let's convert that to string. So let's convert that to string, and let's say we have a label, and let's say we have a label control again, which display a message to the end user, which display a message to the end user. So I'm going to set the text for that label. So label message dot text is equal to this line here, is equal to this line here will return the number of rows. This line here will return the number of rows. So I'm going to append that. So I'm going to append that to hard code is string, basically saying raise, basically saying basically saying so I'm going to append that to hard coded string, basically saying rows retrieved. Rows retrieve. Okay, rows retrieved. So very simple. So very simple. All we have done so far is executed this executed this stored procedure. So far, so all we have done so far is executed this stored procedure. Whatever data we have got in back, we are storing the data in a data set. We are storing a data we are storing the data in a data set, and then we are basically caching the data set, and we are basically caching the data set using this key products data, using this key products data, and then we are setting the data set as the data source, and we are setting the data set as the data source for the grid view control, calling data bind, and then displaying the number of rows, that we have in that data table, in a label control, that we have in that data table, in a label control. Okay, so let's go ahead and run this. Actually we have this code. Actually we have this code. Actually we have this code in page load. Instead of that, let's actually have this code in the button click event. Instead of that, let's actually have this code in the button click event. So on this web form, copy it. On this web form, I have this button. So when I click this button, I reach to the button click event. Now paste here. That is, I want to do this. That is when I want to do this. So I'm going to copy and paste that code there. Now let's run this application. As you might expect, the first time, when I click that button, it is going to take 5 seconds at least to execute. So what we need to do, we need to run this. As you might expect, the first time, when I click. So let me run this. So as you might expect, the first time, when I click that button, it is going to take 5 seconds at least to execute that stored procedure. To execute, take to execute that stored procedure. Okay, because this stored procedure will take 5 seconds at least. Because of this, wait for delay. So the waveform, where is the waveform? Okay. Once it loads up, now look at this. When I click this button, look at this, it is still processing. Look at this, it is still processing. It is going to take at least 5 seconds for that data to be loaded into the grid view control. So 4 rows retrieved. So 4 row retrieved. So 4 row retrieved. Now let's modify this code a little bit. Now let's modify this code a little bit so that even if I click now again, it is going to take 5 seconds. Look at here. Okay. So if I click this, it is going to take 5 seconds again. We have showed you. If I click again, you can see this here. You can see this is the processing. Still processing. Okay. Why? Why? Because every time you click the button, why? Because every time you click the button, you are executing, you are calling that method. You are calling that method. Okay. Because every time you click the button, you are calling, you are executing, you are calling that method, get products data, which in turn will execute that stored procedure, which in turn will execute that stored procedure, will execute that stored procedure, and it is going to take always 5 seconds to load. And it is going to take always 5 seconds to load. Instead of that, let's say if I already have this data in this cache, instead of that, let's say if I already have this data in this cache, retrieve that from the cache rather than reprocessing the stored procedure every time. And to do that, so basically I am saying if we will check, okay, is there is there if this cache object if this cache object which cache object this one. So we will check, okay, is there if this cache object is null, if this cache object is null. So if cache object of basically saying if cache of products data not equal to is not equal to null. Okay, so if it is not equal to null, then I want to retrieve data from the cache object. Else else let me format it. Okay, basically saying if cache of product data not equal to null. Okay, if it is not equal to null, then I want to retrieve data from the cache object. Else if it is null, then we know that we don't have anything in the cache, in which case we want to call this method. In that case, in which case we want to call this method execute the stored procedure, retrieve the data, and then put the data in a cache, and put the data in a cache object, and then assign that as data source, and then assign that as data source for the grid view control, so now here let's slightly change this message. Let's slightly change this message. Since we are retrieving data from the database, I'm going to say whatever the number of rows retrieved from database. Okay, and then I am going to copy this, and then I am going to copy this. And I'm going to copy this just to avoid just to save some time in typing, and pasting it here, and then we will modify this, pasting it here, and then we will modify this. So if cache of products data is not equal to null, then what I want to do is basically I want to retrieve the data set from the cache object. From the cache object. So if data is not equal to null, then what I want to do is basically I want to retrieve the data set from the cache object. So instead of calling this method, I'm going to retrieve from cache object. So cache of products data. So cache of product data. Okay. Now if you look at this cache object, look at what is returning back. So now look at this cache object. What is it? What it returning back? Now if you look at this cache object, look at what it is returning back. It is returning an object. It is returning an object back. But what are we expecting? We are expecting a data set. So I can typecast that using the typecast operator. So I can typecast that using the operator to data set, and then look at that what we are doing with the data set. So typecast it. So I can typecast that using the typecast operator to dataset, and then look at that what we are doing with the dataset. What we are doing with the dataset, we don't have to put it in the cache. We don't have to put it in the cache because it is already there in the cache. So I'm going to get rid of that line. So I'm going to get rid of this line. We are simply setting the data set as data source. We are simply setting the data set as data source, calling the data bind, and we are displaying this message in the label. Let's say whatever rows, 4 rows retrieved from cache. Okay. Now another thing I want to do, I also want to, let's say, display the time it takes. First of all, I need to change here. Rows retrieved from and we are displaying this message, in the label. And here let's say whatever rows, whatever's row, 4 rows retrieved from cache. Okay, now another thing I want to do, I also want to, let's say, display the time it takes. Display the time it takes, when it is retrieving from cache, as supposed to, the time it takes when we have loaded it from the database. And to do that, I'm going to do a small trick here. So let's use date time. So let's use date time object dt. Where to use the date time object? Date time object dt. Let's call this start time. Let's call this start time. So when I click this button, I'm capturing what is the current date and time on the server. And to do that, I can simply use date time dot now. Date time dot to do that, I can simply use date time dot now. Okay, so this is going to return the current date and time when it is about to start processing this piece of code. So okay, so this is going to return the current date and time when it is about to start processing this piece of code. Okay, here should be a cache. So mistakenly I wrote a database. So whatever rows, 4 rows retrieved from cache. Okay, so we have done another thing which we wanted to do. Also want to display the time it takes, when it is retrieving from cache, as suppose. So we have used the date time here. Here you can see this line, date time. Use the date time object dt, name as dt start time. Okay, and I can simply use the date time dot now to capture the date and time. Okay, so that's it. So that is the start time. So that is the start time. And similarly, let's go ahead and compute the end time. Similarly, go ahead and compute the end time. So when the processing reaches here, we know that it has completed processing. So I am going to call this dt and a time. Where the processing reaches here, processing reaches here, we know that it has completed processing. So I am going to call this dt and a time. So date time means copy this. So we know that when the processing reaches here, we know that it has completed processing. So I'm going to call this dt and a time. This should be dt and a time. dt and time, that is the variable. Okay. Now, how do I find out the difference between start time and date and end time in second? It is pretty simple. Let's say int. Let's say int total second, for example, or total time. Total time is equal to, all we need to do is from the end time, subtract the start time from the end time, subtract the start time. So dt and time minus dt start time, and then we have a property, called seconds, called seconds. So when we subtract two dates, we have this property second, which returns the difference between that and the time, and start time in seconds. Convert that to string. Basically that is the integer, so let's store it in that variable. Okay, so now what I want to basically do here is, look at this. We are already appending the message, appending the message to the label here. Instead of that, let's use a string builder. Instead of that, let's use a string builder object, build the message, and then finally we will set that as the text for the label. And to do that, I'm going to use system.text string builder. System.text string builder. System.text string builder class, and system.text string builder class is present in system.text namespace. And let's call this SB message. Let's call this SB message. Let me call this SB message as the name of the variable. So new string builder. So new string builder. And what I'm going to do here is, instead of assigning that message, and what And what I'm going to do here is, instead of assigning that message directly to the label, I am going to append that to the string builder. I'm going to append that to the string builder object. Okay, string builder object. Here is the string builder object. Here it is. Copy this. So I'm going to append that to the string builder object. Okay, and I'm going to do append this. So how to append this? I'm going to append this with append it to the string builder object. So here it is, dot append, and now I'm going to do the same here. Okay, finally here to the string builder object again. I'm going to append the time it took as well. So to the already existing message, I am going to append, let's say for example, let's put a full stop. Let's put a full stop. Let's put a full stop and maybe a space. And then we will append the number of seconds it took. And then we will append the number of second it took. So the total number of second is in this variable. So first of all, what we need to do? So the total number of second in this variable. Which variable? In this variable. So I am going to take that, convert that to string using toString. Convert that to string using toString. And then maybe we can say 5 seconds load a time. And then we can say, maybe we can say 5-second load time. Okay. So now so now let's go ahead and run this and see what is going to happen. Let's rebuild the solution. Let's rebuild the solution. So if you look at this, the code is pretty simple. Caching the data itself, very straightforward. All you need to do is use a key. All you need use a key and then specify whatever data that you want to cache. Okay, and obviously we are using the cache object, and obviously we are using the cache object for that. Okay, and basically here we are checking if the cache, cache of product is not null, and basically here we are checking if the cache, cache of products data is not null. Retrieve that product data. Retrieve that product data from the cache object. Retrieve that product's data from the cache object. Typecast it to dataset. Store it in this variable. Store this in this variable. Store this in this variable ds data set. Store in this variable, which is then set as the data source, for the grid view control. Call data bind, and then here we are retrieving the number of rows, and then here we are retrieving the number of rows that are present in that table. Okay, so let's go ahead and run this. So now, so let's go ahead and run this now. So Control F5 to run the application. So when the waveform loads up, when we click the button for the first time, it is going to execute the stored procedure and get the data from the database. Look at that. It is still processing. It is going to take at least 5 seconds, and we should be getting the data from the database. And we don't have the message there, That is basically because we have not set that to the label. So let's go ahead and set that to the label. So let's go ahead and set to the label. So LBL message. So LBL message dot text. Here it is. LBL message dot text is equal to whatever is there in the string builder. Whatever in the string builder object. So string builder object dot to string. And if you are wondering why we are using string builder object, why can't I use a string object? Anytime we are modifying strings, for performance reasons, it is always better to use string builder objects, because strings of type string are immutable, whereas strings of type string builder are mutable. Oh, if you want to know the difference between between string and string builder object. We have discussed about that in the C# video tutorial, so please check that video. All right, now let's build the solutions once again. Now let's build the solution once again. And run it. And run it. Control F5. Okay, so the first time when we click the button, it should take at least 5 seconds to execute the stored procedure. Look at that, it is still processing. Look at that, it is still processing. Okay, and in 5-second time, look at that, 4 rows retrieved. Look at that, 4 rows retrieved. From database. Look at that, that is the message. 5-second load time. So it took 5-second load time. Now when I click the button again, what is going to happen? It checks this here. What is going to happen? It checked this here. If cache of product is not equal to null, if cache of product is not equal to null, that is true. So it will come here. So it will come here. So it will come here. Retrieve the data from cache. Retrieve the data from cache and then display that. So it has to be relatively faster. So it has to be relatively faster. I click the button. Look at that, 4 rows retrieved from the cache, 0 second. Means I click the button. Look at that, 4 rows retrieved from the cache, 0 seconds load time. If you want to actually know the millisecond as well, there is another property here. Instead of seconds, you can actually use dot total seconds. So go to the coding. Dot, there is another property, dot total second. Okay, now let's run that. So total second usually returns a double. So total second usually returns a double. So let's convert that to be of double data type. We have converted already. And run this now. So let's build this once again. So let's build this once again. So now means control F5. So now when we click that button, it should show the time including the millisecond. So when I click the button, it is going to take at least 5 seconds. I click the look at still processing. So it is going to take 5 seconds, at least 5 seconds. This is the first time. So it has to execute this stored procedure. So it has to execute the stored procedure. Look at that. It is actually took 5 second and that millisecond and that millisecond. Now if I click it again, look at that, it literally took a less than a second. It literally less than a second. I mean 0 seconds. Okay, and look at the message. 4 rows retrieved from cache. 4 rows retrieved from cache. So no matter how many time you click, now it is going to load, within a very less time. If you click this, okay, so no matter how many time you click, now it is going to load within a very less time, because we already have the data in cache. We don't have to re-execute the stored procedure, so our application is going to perform better. So in this video we discussed about storing application data in cache using direct assignment. So in this video we discuss about storing application data in cache using direct assignment. That is, I have a cache key. And then I am assigning data to that key. Okay, next video we will discuss about other options that are available to store data in cache object. That's it for today. Thank you for listening. Have a great day.